Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, former NHL defenseman Tom Laidlaw, who played for a decade with the New York Rangers and Los Angeles Kings. And we are the Laidlaw and Allen Report. And Tom, a lot to talk about here. I want to start with the Penguins. And the reason, because obviously Sidney Crosby is back now. So you've got Malkin and Crosby back together as the 1-2 center punch. This team has really been good this season. And, they're 29, 12, and 5. But it's not the way we expected it to.
Yeah.
Tristan Jarry has ended up stealing the net from Murray. And here's the thing that I really want to talk about. We say Penguins, we think offense.
Yep.
That's been going on for 30 years.
Yeah.
And guess what? They still have that offense.
Mm-hmm.
But what they have this time, which I find interesting, is they're ranked 8th in the NHL with a 2.72 goals against average. And, guys that they weren't counting on, Jack Johnson, for example, like I would assume that if you said to Mike Sullivan that Jack Johnson was going to be a key performer for you this season, if you had said that to him at the start of the season, he'd have gone, well, I don't know that he would have believed that.
Yeah.
Jack Johnson has been a solid contributor, and a guy named John Marino, a 6th-round pick, unexpectedly has moved into their top 4. They've had to because Schultz has been injured. They've had a bunch of injuries. And he's got like 23 points. He's plus 15. Like, he wasn't on the radar at the start of the season. Nobody was talking about that. And, now all of a sudden, there's discussions about, can the Penguins get to Foley in a trade? And boy, obviously they've lost Gunsel, and that's a key loss for them. But if you got to Foley, that mitigates that a little bit. And I don't know how much they'd have to give up or what they'd have to give up. I'm sure they'd be pushing Galchenyuk. Not sure the Kings would go there. But they're a real interesting team. And I want to put this out, and I want to get your reaction. I think the Penguins may be a sleeper in terms of, winning the Cup. I think no one's, everybody knows the Penguins are always there. But, we're mostly talking about the Capitals, the Bruins, even now the Tampa Bay Lightning. All of a sudden, I'm going, well, why couldn't the Penguins win this if they could get another score or two at the trade deadline?
Well, they certainly know how to do it. I mean, look at the last when they were last 2 cups, the first one especially. I remember thinking back. Remember, Crosby was just awful the first half of the year. It almost like there were some rumors that coming back out of the Christmas break that maybe he's going to retire. He's all the injuries he had and everything, and the team wasn't playing well. They went into the playoffs without Letang, their top defenseman. They ended up winning not 1 cup but 2 cups through all that stretch. So, man, it's like, as I hear you talk, like I think a lot to myself, like in other sports, I think in the New England Patriots, where it's just do your job, and they just like players are going in and out, and it's still the same result. Although they didn't win it this year, they're in contention. So I love what they built there. We talked about it before. Sullivan, I think what he's good at, instead of looking at his lineup and saying what he doesn't have, he says, okay, this is what I've got. Like you mentioned, Jack Johnson. So how do we get the best out of Jack Johnson? Very similar to Detroit way back when they were winning their cups, and they bring in guys like Dan Cleary, who banged around from team to team, and they bring him as a free agent. They find a spot for him, and they get the most out of him. I think that's the sign of a good coach and a good organization, where they get the most out of the players they've got. They've got a system there. They've got a culture there where, guys know the work ethic. They know what their jobs are. It's funny when you talk about a trade too. I think to myself, well, I mean, do you really want to trade? Like, what are you going to have to give up to get it to Foley? I mean, LA's not going to give him up for nothing. I guess if you can give up, a draft pick or some minor league player that's a prospect that's not going to hurt your lineup, you do it. But I watch that team play, and I just think to myself, they're that team, the very opposite of, let's say, Tampa Bay from last year, where it was almost too easy for them during the regular season to get them to playoff time. They didn't know how to react to it. I just think with Pittsburgh now, they've battled through. Like it's kind of they're playing kind of playoff hockey all the time because they're missing so many key players out of the lineup. All those other kids get to play and get to develop and get better and better. So I agree with you totally. They're that kind of team that if they win the Stanley Cup, you're going, it doesn't surprise me a bit. They know how to win.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting about them. I look at their line combinations last night, and Crosby, is Dominic Simon and Jared McCann, and both of those are really solid NHL players. They know what they're doing. They'll get the puck in the net. But this has been throughout his career until he ended up getting Gunsel. It was either a new guy every year. Or it's guys that it doesn't matter who he plays with, and he still gets the job done. And it's to me kind of part of the success. Well, you mentioned too just the culture there, and I just in my new role as a freelancer, I did a piece for the Penguins website about just over the last 30 years. You can make a case that this Penguins team has been the best franchise. At least from the fan perspective, of any other teams over the last 30 years.
Yep, sure.
And you make that case on the basis of 5 Stanley Cup championships. No one else has that many. But also 15 scoring championships. Yep. Now, the majority of teams in the league have none during that period. And there are 10 teams over that 30 years that don't have any Stanley Cup championships either. Right. The teams that can compete in terms of, challenging to be the best franchise from the fan perspective, a team like Detroit won 4, plus they've got the same sort of name players. They had Lidstrom and Yzerman and some Hall of Famers, Brendan Shanahan, Sergei Fedorov, Dominic Hasek. They've had a lot of players, but now, the Red Wings haven't won since 2008. Yep. The Penguins just won a couple of years ago, back-to-back titles. And the Red Wings are 31st in the NHL now. And the Penguins are 4th in the NHL right now. So I just think this franchise is remarkable. And we talked on a previous show about the culture and how it's sort of passed down almost tribal. And I think this team, rightfully so. We're talking a lot about the Capitals and the Bruins and everything, but I think we shouldn't forget about the Penguins.
Well, and like to all your point, talking about all that last 30 years, if you're potentially going to buy season tickets for the Penguins, you're buying every year thinking, this team's legitimately got a chance to win the Stanley Cup every year that they played for the last, as long as I can remember, they seem like they're always a team in the running. Even if they've had their tough times, they seem to, like you said, all the injuries, they seem to pull it all together. So, no, I agree. It's a special team, and I do compare it to those teams in other sports, like the New England Patriots. That they just seem like they're all, no matter what happens, they've got the core guys. Tom Brady's there in New England, Sidney Crosby's there in Pittsburgh, but other players come and go, and they still keep winning. So
yeah, it's almost like they're. We talked about whether the Hurricanes could be the Green Bay Packers, but the Penguins, have sort of been the Packers in terms of they're a smaller market, like. In my story, I quoted a fan saying, "Hey, look, we're not New York or L.A. or Chicago, we're Pittsburgh, and they're a smaller market." Although after the last, when we talked a little bit about that, someone sent me an email saying, they thought the Buffalo Sabres could be a great example. Like I
did see that. Yes,
they could be the Packers. So there are kind of a lot of choices for that. But the Penguins' consistency. They've only missed the playoffs. We all remember when they bottomed out because they ended up with Crosby.
Yep.
They did. They missed the playoffs for 4 consecutive years. But here's the deal. That was the only 4 times they missed the playoffs in the last 30 years. Oh. And they've now been in it 13 consecutive seasons.
You think the Rangers were thinking about that bottoming out so it could draft me in the 6th round? You think they thought about that back in 1978?
Yeah, I'm sure the tanking was part of their strategy to get Laidlaw for their defense.
Get him in the 6th round. Yeah.
Well, you could be a Penguin right now the way they're playing. I mean, they're trying to limit scoring chances and so forth, and that's not what we normally associate with Penguins hockey. We think of Crosby and Malk and wheeling and dealing and going all the way back to Mario Lemieux. Let's move on to another subject because I think this is a really fun one to get your perspective on, Tom, because this is why I like to be doing this with a former player. Zack Kassian was suspended 2 games. We've talked about this on previous podcasts. But what's interesting, he said that, there'll be more retribution for Tkachuk to come. and all based on the idea that, if you're going to play the way that Tkachuk played, on the line, and Kassian said the NHL explained to him why Tkachuk's, hits were legal and so forth. But, he was playing right there on the line in the gray area that, he thought that Tkachuk should have fought. And now I guess he's going to challenge him again. He says he's going to use legal means, though, and, body checks and so forth. But here's the question about that. What Tkachuk said at the time, and I'm sure what he believes now, is, I'm not going to fight Kassian because, I'm trying to win. I'm not interested in preserving the tradition of the league. I'm trying to win the game. And that's not a good trade for us, me for Kassian, because Tkachuk obviously is a key player in their offense.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, as a former player, where do you stand on that? This is tradition versus winning hockey. Like, where do we go with that?
Well, you might be a little bit surprised by my answer, being the old school guy, playing back in the 80s and the way we played back then. But I honestly don't have a problem with what either player did or what either player said. I think, so just to be clear, so Kassian twice tried to wrap around in the Calgary zone. So it's a play where he's behind the net. He's trying to come to the front of the net and score a goal. And twice Tkachuk hit him hard. And I've heard some people say, well, that's a cheap play. You shouldn't be doing that. He should be able to come around to the side of the net and not think that he's going to get his head taken off. And I'm thinking to myself, what? I mean, you're going to allow some guy to just freely come from behind the net and try to score a goal? No, you play the body on that guy. You don't want him thinking he can just come there and nobody's going to do anything to him. So I like what Tkachuk did. I don't have a problem with it. But I also like what Kassian did. So if you think it's on the line or somewhat of a dirty play, then you stand up for yourself or your teammate and you do what you did. There's sometimes you say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to suck it up and take the 2-minute penalty or 5-minute penalty. I've got to stop this from happening to our team anymore. So I have no problem with what Kassian did either. But and then for Tkachuk to say, and this is where it sounds kind of strange, but I like what Tkachuk is saying. Yeah, I'm more valuable to my team on the ice than Kassian is to his team on the ice. So I'm going to stay on the ice. But and the thing I like about Tkachuk is that I can just about guarantee you he's not going to stop playing the way he's going to play. He's going to continue to do that. And if Kassian wants to run him or take a legal hit against him, that's fine. That's hockey. Go ahead and do it. So, to me, the game has changed so much where, fighting back in the 70s and 80s and in the 90s was part of a strategy. It was a tactic. It was part of intimidation and not allowing your team to get intimidated. But that's all changed now. That to me, that's just not part of the game anymore. Again, I like Kassian. I like what I hate to say this, being the Rangers and everything, but I like Tom Wilson in Washington too. When you're playing against the Washington Capitals, that if you do something to a Capital player, somebody like Tom Wilson, probably Tom Wilson, is going to run you or challenge you to a fight. If you don't want to fight him, then he's going to run you through the end board. So I have no problem with what either one of them did. I want my guys in my defensive zone to make the offensive players pay a price for coming to the net. There was no penalty called on Tkachuk. It was a fine hit. Kassian didn't like it, and he did something about it. So all around, I think it's Calgary against Edmonton. Can't wait for the next game. Everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen. I think it's great. That's both players do what they need to do.
Yeah, it's I like it. Basically, what you're saying is everybody's right. So it makes it, and I actually understand that from this perspective as well, because I think it is complicated, and I think it's complicated because not like if you look at social media, there are a lot of former players have weighed in. Timo Solani, prominent among them, who didn't like the Tkachuk hit. Other players have chimed in and said as well. And some people have said that Tkachuk, should have fought him. But, my take is that every circumstance is different. In this circumstance, the Oilers have to get into the playoffs. That's their mandate right now. And Calgary is trying to win the division. So Tkachuk is absolutely right.
Yeah.
You got to be careful. If this had happened between the 31st place team and the 29th place team, then I think that Kassian would have every right to expect Tkachuk to fight, by calling him out. But Kassian has to understand that the stakes are too high. We hear it all the time in the playoffs. We hear it in the playoffs. I don't want my guy taking a penalty. He's too valuable for us. So I get it, and I actually understand your perspective on that. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And the game's just changed so much too.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, I mean, like players were drafted for certain reasons. I was drafted. I was a big, tough farm boy defenseman kind of thing, but they don't draft like that anymore. There's they draft defensemen more. And this is nothing wrong with this at all. It's just where the game's changed. It's like you're drafting players more like defensively. You get the puck out of our zone quicker. That's more the defense of today instead of pounding people like it used to be. So to think that the guys are going to play the same way that Tkachuk, and especially because I have no problem with Tkachuk because he's answered the bell. Like he went after Drew Doughty there in LA several times, and he didn't necessarily fight, but he didn't back. Right. He didn't stop hitting them. And even going back the old days too. There's some great players like John Tonelli is a great friend of mine, but we hated each other when we played against each other with the Rangers and Islanders. He didn't fight, but I tried to do everything in the world to intimidate him, to cross-check him and everything, but he never backed down. So you don't have to always the theory that you have to stand up for yourself and fight all the time. And if you don't do it, that means that you're somewhat less of a man. It never wasn't true back then. And it's not true now. So I love it all. I think it's great. Well,
I remember as a kid, everybody said, well, it was so simple back then. I'm not so sure that it was. No. When you were a fan and you were trying to watch it and trying to figure out, you knew that you were going to have to pay a price if you went after the goalie or after the star player, but there were a lot of situations where you weren't really sure that it was preserving a tradition or two guys who've just lost their minds.
Yeah,
Well, would you have been drafted if you would come up in this era?
Well, I would have had to change my game quite a bit. I'd like to think that I would have changed my game because my goal was to play in the NHL, and I would have done what I had to do. Because back then, that's what they wanted from defensemen. They wanted the defenseman to move up. The old Herb Brooks story that I've told so many times. Herb said to me in front of the whole team, he said, "Laidlaw, when you get the puck, give it to somebody else. You're not supposed to have it." Was probably one of the greatest lessons I ever learned in hockey. Was my job was to get the puck up to the forwards as quickly as possible. Then after that, it was to hammer people along the boards. Like every time they come down the boards, I had to hit them. Every time they came to the front of the net, they're getting cross-checked. Every chance you get, you're trying to intimidate somebody. So that's the game from, years ago. So, now in today's game, I would have had to be better at skating. You can't hook and hold as much. So you got to improve your skating. But yeah, I think that if you want it bad enough, you'll figure out what you have to do to make it.
Well, whenever you compare eras, I always have to remind folks is that you have to project what the player would be like in this era.
Yes.
Like, for example, Gordie Howe played his entire career at 202.
Yeah.
If he came up now, he would play probably at 220.
Yeah.
Maybe 225.
Yes.
And you, I'm sure, would have been a much more physical specimen than you are now, because you've proven now with the way you are at 60 with your True Grit lifestyle, you had it in you to do that.
Totally.
But you didn't. You were more of a beer drinker than a guy who lived in the weight room.
It is funny because you think that people ask about it, and they're like, I'm in the gym now. I'm on the balance board doing all my exercises, squats and deadlifts and everything. And I got my 6-pack abs at 61 years old. I didn't have those when I was 21 years old. So
you had a 6-pack when you were 21 for sure. But
that's a 6-pack. It was in the refrigerator.
As an old guy who just marvels, I don't do the workouts, but I look at your workouts from time to time. And what's impressive is when you're on that balance thing and trying to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing as you get older that they tell you that you worry most about is balance. And
well, it all started for me. When I went on Survivor, they have a lot of the challenges. There's some kind of balance involved in it. So I started getting on the balance board and everything. And I thought to myself, wow, my core was stronger. And these are all things, these players now, when they talk about their diets and their core and the plyometrics and all this stuff. I watched Ryan O'Reilly, some of his workouts. He's on the balls and stuff like that. Similar, like he takes it to a whole nother level from where I'm at. But, it's funny because, we just didn't know about that stuff back then at all. Or even if we did know about it, we weren't going to pay attention. The mentality was just totally different, right? It's, ride the bike, lift weights, squat, deadlift, bench press and everything, and then go drink beer. And that's certainly not the case now. Yeah.
No, I know. All right, let's move on to a different subject. I want to talk about Bruce Boudreau. Speaking of getting older, Bruce Boudreau, and you and I are in the same age grouping here. And I only bring that up, and I bring it up mostly in jest, is that Bruce Boudreau made a mistake last night. He, in preparing his lineup, left off Greg Patern, who was going to play on the defense. And when Greg showed up to play, the official said, "Not so fast.
Yeah.
You're not eligible. You weren't on the starting lineup. You're out of here." And so they had to play with 5 defensemen, and he took full responsibility, he being Boudreau, saying, "Look, I made a mistake. It was just the way that I numbered it, the way I ordered it, and when I got to the end and I had a full sheet, I thought I thought I had done it right."
Right.
How big a deal is this? And should we make a lot of this, or not so much about this, Tom?
Well, the danger is from the locker room now that the players are looking at saying, okay, listen, they're demanding, and rightfully so, they're demanding that we come prepared to play the game. Now our coaching staff doesn't appear to be prepared to coach the game, right? They start off with a mistake right away, but it is a mistake, and that is part of the that's part of life in general. That's part of particularly the game of hockey, right? That we're always going to make mistakes. Every time you go into a game, you know that you are not going to play the perfect game. So I think it's important, like to me, and this is going to be the real test in the locker room. How strong is the locker room? Do they now? It can happen where people are saying if they go on a little bit of a losing streak, our coach is incompetent or whatever, and now the players almost use that as an excuse that we're losing now because the coach doesn't know what he's doing. Well, to me, that's a cop out. The coach made a mistake. It was wrong. He wasn't prepared. No question. He took the onus for it. There's no doubt about it. So now it's time to move forward. If anything, I think you use it. If you get a strong enough locker room, the leaders in the locker room are saying, okay, guys, listen. He's a human being, all right? We make plenty of mistakes. This is not an excuse. Let's go play harder than we were playing before. That's what you look for from inside the locker room. And that, to me, that's going to be a big test, because that's one of my concerns with the Minnesota team. I think we've talked about this before, where it's just like, who are they? What's their identity? Who's the leaders? Where's that grinded out mentality? Let's fight through things. I mean, John Tortorella, look what he's got going on there in Columbus with his team. A far less talented team, and they're scratching out wins all the time. So that's, to me, it's going to be a big test for the locker room. Do they have what it takes to actually kind of take advantage of that mistake and do something to make your team stronger? So,
if that had happened when Herbie Brooks was coaching you, would you have laughed it off, or would you have been mad at Herbie for doing that?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm trying to picture that whole scene. It'd be one of those things that like Herbie would just be livid, and Herbie would take credit for it, but he would actually use it to his advantage, to say, all right, I screwed up here, but you guys, you've got to go up and play. He wouldn't let it he certainly wouldn't go like sulk in the corner and hide or something like that. Herbie would never do that. But I'll tell you what, we had a good bunch of guys, and we may have waited for a couple of days, but then we may have done something in practice to get him back, like to make fun of him, like maybe in practice, have some lineup sheet with all kinds of phony names on it or whatever like that, to say, Herbie, are these the guys on the team today or what? Like maybe use like the New York Giants lineup. And Herb was good in that he would pretend that he was mad, but he would love that kind of stuff. Like that's the key. Like he would see it. Okay, he didn't do it on purpose, but okay, it's happened. It's a mistake. Now, what do we do with it kind of mentality? And he would love the fact that we all kind of rallied together against him and make fun of him. He wouldn't show us that maybe, face to face, but he would definitely get a kick out of it.
Well, Tom, you made a good point before we went on air, just in regard to the fact that you're surprised there was no fail-safe.
Yeah.
For the lineup. That's why wasn't an assistant coach put in charge of checking that right before it went to the referee? Like you would think you would do that as just a matter of course.
Well, and that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I'd be totally surprised. I think almost every team does that as a matter of practice every game, that it is not just one guy's decision. So to Bruce Boudreau's credit, it seems like he's stepping up and taking the blame, but I bet you somebody else dropped the ball there too. That's just not a one-man thing.
Yeah, no, I think that as well, and it just shows you what I really like Bruce. And the one concern you have in this situation, like I think it would have been better had one of the younger coaches in the league had done this. By better, I mean because this could happen to anyone. But Bruce is 65,
yeah,
and and I know when you get to be 60. Everybody looks at every little mistake you make as, is this the of trouble. So it's too bad it happened to Bruce.
But I got to tell you, the more we talk about it, though, Kevin, I tell you, like I'm picturing if it happened on a team I was on, we would have some fun with it.
I'm sure. And Bruce is very likable, and I always describe it as like playing for your grandfather. But it's just too bad that
get the picture like when see Bruce walks in the locker room and everybody stands up, kind of grabs his arm and kind of guides him in. You okay, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. Or Ryan Suter says, before they're going out, he stands up because Bruce, am I playing tonight?
Yeah,
I could see they would have some fun. I hope they do.
Yes,
because Bruce is a good guy, and you and I have talked a lot about that Minnesota Wild team, and I think we're both in agreement that there's always been something not quite right about it. You could just feel it. The mix didn't feel, but I've never felt it was Bruce's issue.
Yep.
I think he, his history speaks for himself. I know he hasn't done well in the postseason, but I feel that that's been more of bad luck than anything else. But he's won wherever he's been. He's been successful in the minor leagues and with the teams he's in. In a regular season, he's been very, very, very good. Yep. Final subject I want to talk a little bit about. Thinking back when both Jack Eichel and Austin Matthews were coming in prospects in the U.S. National Development Program, there was a lot of talk about. I remember going to do a story on Eichel, and he was going to be the same year, obviously, as Connor McDavid. And I wrote a big story, but I was told by many people within the organization, there's a guy even better than Eichel coming up for the Americans, and that's Austin Matthews. And now I'm looking this season, and pretty much, this is the number 2015. This is Eichel, number 2 pick overall, right behind Connor McDavid, and then the number 1 2016 pick in Austin Matthews. And my question to you is, like right now, these players to me seem almost equal in their ability to lift their teams and carry them. I don't see. I mean, they're different players. Matthews is a better goal scorer. Eichel is a better, playmaker. But they're separated by 4 points, 28 goals to 34 goals. They're both equally important. But do you see one better than the other, or how do you view them?
Yeah, you know what is we were talking about that before, and I started thinking about it more. I was playing both when Steve Yzerman started his career and when Mario Lemieux started his career. A little different timing than these two players we're talking about here, a little farther apart when they started their careers. But the similarity I see is that there's two great offensive players, and Yzerman and Mario Lemieux were great offensive players, but they hadn't really built up that intensity, that fight through things mentality. And then they went through things. Yzerman went through injuries, Lemieux, his illnesses, all that stuff, and became not just those talented offensive players, but these leaders and gritty guys and getting in fights and blocking shots, things they weren't doing early in their careers. And I just see, I hope for both those players that they develop that a little bit more of that. And not this, and I want to be careful. I don't want to say that they don't have that grit or desire to win now, but you want to see more of it. It was particularly with Eichel. And this is kind of unfair to him. When you watch Eichel play in Buffalo, sometimes it's almost so easy for him. It looks like he's not even trying, but he's such a talented athlete that I think Connor or Matthews has got the same thing going on. So I think as they get older and they go through more stuff and they've got to fight through things, maybe they lose in the playoffs or they get criticized more, whatever it is, they become more, like that grittier kind of players. And then I think they'll both, but I'm with you. And we've talked about this before too, especially with Matthews out of Toronto and Connor McDavid in Edmonton. When they came in as rookies, as 18-year-old kids, it was almost kind of freakish how mature they were, how they handled things. And now other kids come along, if they don't start out like Capo Caco here with the Rangers, maybe he isn't playing as great as everybody thought he was going to, but he's 18 years old. He's a baby still. So, but I tell you, with Eichel and Matthews, great talents. I agree with you. They are a little bit different players, but really two super high-end talented offensive players. If they can continue to grow as players, they'll have some really special careers.
Yeah, what's interesting is, I saw on TSN, Bob McKenzie had a little report that, the CBA negotiations that everyone was encouraged by last fall now have sort of hit a stumbling block. But I think eventually that'll get done. And it sure seems like the players, if they're going to give an extension, are going to want that Olympic participation. And I bring that up because, last time, for the longest time, Americans had no centers. They were playing Joe Pavelski at center because he was their best option, and he really wasn't even a natural center, but he was the number one center for the Americans. They just didn't have any. Well, now if you go in 2022, you're going, Matthews and Eichel, Dylan Larkin, JT Miller has stepped up. Trocheck is there. A lot of good centers.
Do you think the Olympics are going to be that big of a deal to the players and the CBA?
Well, it sure seems like it. They sure talk like it is, and it seems to me to be a real easy thing for the league to give up. Like, I understand all the arguments about it, so I
don't see the benefit. I don't see why. To me, well, I know it's more players now, but it's still a minority of players that get to participate in the Olympics.
It is, but the players that don't go, love that break. That's part of it as well. So I think, anyway, you have been listening to the Laidlaw and Allen Report. I'm Allen. He's Laidlaw. We'll be back next week. Thanks for joining us.
See you next week, guys.